He never planned to marry her. That was the truth he kept buried deep inside his heart. The decision was made slowly, not out of excitement or love, but out of pressure that grew heavier with every passing day. His family reminded him again and again of a promise made long ago. A promise spoken when life was simple, when words were easy, when no one thought about how real those words would one day become. He had tried to avoid it. He delayed the talks, stayed busy with work, and convinced himself that time would somehow solve everything. But time did the opposite. It brought the promise closer, clearer, and impossible to escape. His parents spoke of honor, responsibility, and doing what was right. Friends told him marriage would change his heart. No one asked what he truly felt. And maybe he never said it out loud because he wasn't sure himself. She lived a very different life. Quiet, unnoticed, and simple. She had grown up hearing that patience was strength and silence was respect. She never learned how to ask for attention or demand love. When her family told her about the proposal, she didn't smile or cry. She only nodded. In her heart, there was fear and hope standing side by side. She had seen him only a few times before. From a distance, mostly. He always looked serious, focused, and confident. To her, he felt like someone from another world. She knew she was not considered beautiful by common standards. People often overlooked her, spoke over her, or forgot she was even in the room. She accepted this as her fate and learned to live within it. When the families met to finalize everything, she sat quietly with her hands folded in her lap. Her clothes were plain, her head lowered, her voice barely heard. Some people exchanged looks, not out of cruelty, but judgment. They assumed she was lucky. Lucky that such a man agreed to marry her? No one thought to wonder if he was lucky too. He noticed her silence, but he misunderstood it. To him, it looked like weakness. He thought she had nothing to say, nothing to show, nothing beyond her simple presence. He convinced himself that love was not necessary for marriage. Respect would be enough. Duty would be enough. Over time, things would settle. The wedding was planned quickly, with little room for questions or hesitation. On the wedding day, the air was filled with celebration, but his heart felt strangely empty. He stood among relatives and guests, smiling when expected, greeting people, doing everything right. Inside, his thoughts wandered. He wondered how his life had taken such a sharp turn. She sat in a room with the women of the family, dressed in traditional clothes that covered more than they revealed. Her hands trembled slightly as they prepared her. She listened to advice she had heard all her life. Be patient. Be respectful. Keep the home peaceful. Never raise your voice. Never complain. Love will come if God wills it. When they finally sat together, the space between them felt larger than the room itself. Their eyes met briefly and then moved away. He felt unfamiliar with her presence. She felt overwhelmed by his. The ceremonies passed, the photos were taken, and the guests praised them as a perfect couple. That night, when the noise faded and the doors closed, silence filled the space. He sat on one side of the room, lost in thought. She remained still, unsure of what to say or do. The silence stretched until it felt painful. Finally, he spoke. He told her he hoped they would respect each other. He said he was not good with emotions and needed space. His voice was calm, careful, and distant. She listened closely, nodding slowly, taking every word seriously. When he finished, she replied softly that she understood. She said she would never be a burden. Her words were simple, but they cut deeper than he realized. Days passed and routine took over. He left early for work and returned late. She managed the home quietly, waking before him, sleeping after him. She made sure everything was neat, that meals were ready, that his clothes were clean. She never asked where he was or how his day went unless he spoke first. People around them noticed the distance. After all, some marriages look like this, didn't they? He told himself there was nothing wrong. Peace mattered more than passion. Comfort mattered more than emotion. Yet sometimes late at night he would hear soft sounds from another room. Not loud cries, just quiet sobs quickly silenced. He pretended not to notice. He didn't want to open a door he wasn't ready to walk through. She spent her days adjusting to a life where she belonged but didn't feel chosen. She reminded herself that this marriage gave her security. Many women dreamed of fewer worries and more stability. She told herself to be grateful. Still, her heart ached in small, unnoticed ways. Sometimes she stood by the window, watching the world outside, wondering what it felt like to be loved openly. She brushed these thoughts aside quickly, afraid they would turn into regret. He, on the other hand, felt an unfamiliar restlessness. Something was missing, but he couldn't name it. He had done what was expected. He had fulfilled his duty. So why did peace feel so far away? This was how their story began. Not with love or excitement, but with quiet agreement and unspoken hearts. Two people bound together by responsibility, standing side by side, yet worlds apart. Neither of them knew that this beginning, heavy and unsure, was only the first step of a journey that would slowly change everything at this point. Neither expected beauty to change anything. Neither imagined that the person they misunderstood the most was the one who would later challenge everything they believed about love, worth, and seeing someone clearly. For now, there was only duty and silence. Life after the wedding settled into a quiet routine, one that felt heavy with unspoken rules. Every morning, he woke up early, dressed neatly, and left the house without much conversation. She watched him from a distance, careful not to interrupt him. She learned the sound of his footsteps, the way he picked up his keys, the short pause before the door closed. These small details became part of her daily rhythm. She spent her days inside the house, cleaning, cooking, and keeping everything in order, not because he demanded it, but because she believed it was her responsibility. A peaceful home, she thought, might lead to a peaceful heart. She spoke little, moved softly, and tried not to make mistakes. Even when she felt tired or lonely, she reminded herself that marriage was not always about happiness. It was about patience. When he returned home in the evenings, he often found everything ready. Dinner was warm, the lights were on, and the place felt calm. He acknowledged it with a nod or a brief thank you, then retreated into silence again. Sometimes he ate alone. Sometimes they shared the same table, but not conversation. The clinking of plates and the ticking clock filled the gaps where words should have been at first. He didn't notice how carefully she avoided his eyes. He didn't see how she waited for him to speak first. How her shoulders stiffened whenever someone mentioned love or happiness. To him, things were working. There was no conflict, no arguments, no noise. Compared to the chaos he had seen in other marriages, this felt manageable. But small things began to catch his attention. He noticed that she always served herself last, that she smiled softly at guests even when they ignored her, that she never corrected anyone, even when blamed for things that weren't her fault. He told himself it was just her nature. But something about it stayed with him longer than expected. When relatives visited, the contrast grew clearer. People praised him for being responsible and settled. Some whispered that he had done her a favor by marrying her. She heard those words but pretended not to. He heard them too, and for the first time, they made him uncomfortable. He couldn't explain why. There were moments when he tested the distance. He would ask simple questions, like how her day was, or if she needed anything. Her answers were always polite, brief, and careful. She never asked him back. It wasn't because she didn't care. It was because she was afraid of crossing a line she didn't understand. At night they slept in separate silence. The room felt large, even when the lights were off. He lay awake sometimes, staring at the ceiling. She faced the other side, listening to her own breathing, wondering if this would be her life forever. Neither of them spoke about expectations or feelings. Both assumed the other preferred it this way. Outside, life continued as usual. He was respected at work, admired for his focus and discipline. People saw him as stable and reliable. She, on the other hand, existed quietly in the background. Neighbors knew her as the polite woman who kept to herself. Some mistook her silence for lack of depth. Others barely noticed her at all. One afternoon, a small incident changed the way he looked at her. A neighbor's child fell and scraped his knee outside their home. She rushed to help without hesitation, calming the crying child, cleaning the wound and comforting him as if he were her own. He watched from a distance. Her face softened, her voice warm and steady. It was a side of her he had never seen. Later that day, he asked her about it. She shrugged lightly and said she liked helping when she could. There was no pride in her voice, no need for praise. That unsettled him more than he expected. Over time, these moments added up. He noticed how she listened more than she spoke, how she understood things without being told, how she remembered small details about his habits and preferences without ever mentioning them. None of it felt forced. It came naturally to her. Still, he kept his distance. He didn't know how to step closer without breaking the unspoken agreement between them. He feared that showing interest might create expectations he wasn't ready to fulfill. She sensed the walls, too. Each day she reminded herself not to hope for more. Hope, she had learned, could hurt more than loneliness. When family members asked if she was happy, she smiled and said she was fine. When they asked about him, she praised his character. She never spoke of her own emptiness. Some evenings, she sat with a book she barely read, lost in thoughts. She wondered if beauty had everything to do with how people were treated. She wondered if being invisible was safer than being seen and rejected. These thoughts stayed locked inside her heart. He, meanwhile, grew restless in ways that confused him. The quiet that once felt safe now felt heavy. He found himself listening for her movements in the house, noticing her absence when she stepped out. When she spoke, he paid more attention to her tone, her pauses, her choice of words. One night, he overheard her crying again. This time it felt different. The sound wasn't loud, but it carried weight. He stood still, unsure of what to do. For the first time, walking away felt wrong. But stepping forward felt even harder. In the end, he did nothing. The silence returned, thicker than before. She wiped her tears quickly, blaming herself for feeling weak. She told herself she had nothing to complain about. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't unkind. He simply wasn't hers. And maybe that was enough. Days turned into weeks. The routine remained, but the air between them slowly changed. Awareness replaced ignorance. Curiosity replaced indifference. Neither of them spoke about it, but both felt it. Still, others continued to see them through old assumptions. They saw a man who had settled down responsibly and a woman who should be grateful. They didn't see the quiet strength she carried or the slow questions forming in his mind. By the end of this part of their journey, nothing dramatic had happened on the surface. No arguments. No sudden confessions. Yet something important had shifted. The distance between them was no longer empty. It was filled with unasked questions, quiet observations, and the beginning of something neither of them fully understood yet. They were still living a marriage built on duty. But duty, slowly and quietly, was starting to crack. The change did not come suddenly. It arrived quietly, almost unnoticed, like light moving across a room. At first, he thought it was nothing. A passing thought, a momentary feeling. But with each passing day, it became harder to ignore. One weekend, a family event forced them to spend more time together outside the house. Relatives gathered, talking loudly, laughing, comparing lives. He stayed close but distant as always. She walked a few steps behind, careful with her posture, her eyes mostly lowered. At first, nothing felt different. People greeted him warmly and offered respectful smiles to her. Some were polite. Others were dismissive. A few spoke to her as if she were invisible. She responded kindly to all of them, never once letting hurt reflect on her face. Then something unexpected happened. A situation arose where she had to speak. A disagreement between relatives, small but tense. Everyone talked over one another, voices rising. Suddenly, she stepped forward and spoke calmly. Her voice was soft but steady. Her words were clear, thoughtful, and wise. The room slowly quieted. He watched closely, almost confused. This was not the silent woman he thought he knew. She expressed herself with respect but firmness. She didn't take sides. She brought peace. When she finished, people nodded in agreement. Some even thanked her. She stepped back again, returning to her quiet place. But something had shifted. He felt it. For the rest of the day, his eyes followed her without him realizing. He noticed the way she carried herself, the calm confidence that appeared when she wasn't under pressure. He noticed her smile. Not forced, not shy, just real. It struck him that he had never looked this closely before. Later that evening, as they prepared to leave, someone complimented her thoughtfully. She accepted it gently and moved on. He felt a strange tightness in his chest. He couldn't explain why. Back home, the silence between them felt different. Not as empty. Not as heavy. He wanted to say something, anything, but stopped himself. He wasn't sure where to begin. Over the next few days, he began noticing details he had ignored before. The way she tied her hair differently when working. The care she took in choosing simple clothes that suited her quietly. The calm attention she gave to everything she did. It wasn't a dramatic beauty. It was subtle, deep, and steady. One evening, a power outage left the house lit only by candlelight. They sat across from each other, shadows dancing on the walls. Without the usual distractions, conversation felt unavoidable. She spoke first, asking if he was managing things well at work. Her question was sincere, not cautious. He answered honestly, surprised by his own openness. She listened without interrupting, without advice, just presence. When he finished, he felt lighter. That frightened him. He was used to control, used to keeping emotions at a safe distance, yet here he was, sharing pieces of himself with someone he once believed he could never connect with. She, too, felt the change. She noticed his tone soften, his eyes linger longer. She didn't read too much into it. Experience had taught her not to. But she felt it, quietly. Like a fragile warmth she didn't yet trust. There came a morning when she had to step out without her usual modest cover. A practical reason, nothing dramatic. He saw her before she noticed his presence. For a brief moment, she stood naturally, unguarded. The image stayed with him long after she left. It wasn't shock born from appearance alone. It was the realization that he had built a version of her in his mind that had never truly existed. He had defined her by silence, by assumptions, by other people's opinions. That day, he struggled to focus on anything else. When she returned home, he looked at her differently. Not with judgment, not with distance. With curiosity, almost with awe. The shift was subtle, but she felt it immediately. It unsettled her. That night, she lay awake, questioning his sudden attention. Had she done something wrong? Was he uncomfortable? Her mind searched for reasons but found none. Over the following weeks, their interactions changed. He asked more questions. Not out of courtesy, but interest. What she liked to read. What she thought about certain things. She answered carefully at first, then slowly with more truth. He discovered depth where he expected emptiness, insight where he assumed simplicity, strength where he imagined weakness. She began to speak more freely, not because she felt safe yet, but because she felt seen. Even if just a little, the outside world noticed something too. Comments shifted. People remarked on how settled he seemed. Some noticed her presence more clearly now. Others were surprised by her composure and quiet confidence. But with awareness came regret. He started remembering past moments. His indifference, his silence, his emotional distance. Each memory carried weight. He wondered how much pain he had caused without realizing it. She noticed his efforts, but her heart remained guarded. Hope had hurt her before. She refused to let it happen again. One evening, he tried to thank her for everything. The home, the peace, her patience. The words felt clumsy coming out, but sincere. She listened, unsure how to respond. Then she smiled softly and said nothing was required of him. That answer stayed with him the whole night. For the first time, he feared something unexpected. Not conflict, not failure. He feared losing her without ever truly knowing her. At this point, nothing had been said clearly. No confessions. No promises. But the foundation of duty had cracked enough for emotion to slip through. He had seen her now. Not just her appearance, but her presence. In one scene, she could never be unseen again. The more he noticed her, the heavier his thoughts became. Awareness brought questions, and questions brought regret. He began replaying moments he once ignored. Her silence at the table. The way she stepped back to give him space. The nights she cried quietly when she thought no one could hear. At the time, he had told himself it was normal. Now it felt like a failure he could no longer excuse. He started trying in small, careful ways. Nothing dramatic. A softer tone. Sitting a little longer at the table, asking if she was tired. Not because he felt heroic, but because distance now felt wrong. She noticed immediately. Noticed and grew cautious. She had learned the cost of hope too well. When he spoke to her with warmth, she answered politely, but briefly. When he stayed home more often, she kept busy in other rooms. It wasn't punishment. It was self-protection. She couldn't tell whether this change was real or temporary. She had trusted quiet promises before and paid for it with disappointment. This confused him. He expected gratitude, a smile, some sign that his effort mattered. Instead, he felt her pulling away, more distant than before. It scared him more than silence ever had. One evening, he came home earlier than usual and found her sitting on the floor, sorting old photos. She looked surprised to see him. Embarrassed, almost as if he had walked into a private space of her heart. He asked her what she was doing. She hesitated, then said she was organizing memories. Her voice carried something heavy, something unfinished. He wanted to ask more, but the fear of crossing another line stopped him. Later that night, he couldn't sleep. Her words stayed with him. Organizing memories? He wondered which ones included him. He wondered which ones hurt. The guilt grew sharper. He began to realize that love, whatever this feeling was, could not be demanded or rushed. Respect built slowly, especially after neglect. And he had neglected her not loudly, not cruelly, but enough to make her shrink. She sensed his inner struggle, even when he said nothing. His eyes betrayed him. They carried apology without words, concern without confidence. She didn't know what to do with that look. It stirred emotions she had tried hard to bury. Sometimes she caught herself remembering. The man she now saw flashes of the man who listened, who worried, who noticed. Then she stopped herself. Memory had fooled her before. Pressure returned in another form. Relatives noticed the shift and began commenting openly. Some joked that he had finally fallen in love. Others hinted that she should be grateful for his attention. Their words reopened wounds she had never spoken about. One afternoon, after a visit filled with unwanted remarks, she retreated into herself. He noticed the silence deepen. When he asked gently if something was wrong, she shook her head. That answer hurt more than honesty would have. That night, he finally understood something important. His fear was no longer about commitment or pressure. It was about loss. She might still be there physically, but emotionally. She was already learning how to live without expecting him. The realization unsettled him deeply. He decided to stop tiptoeing around truth, not with grand speeches, but with consistency. He made breakfast one morning without being asked. Left her a note before work. Sat beside her quietly instead of across from her. These gestures were small but steady. She didn't respond immediately, but she noticed. Her confusion turned into careful observation. She watched how long the change would last. Days passed, then weeks. The effort didn't fade. Still, she remained guarded. She had spent too much time feeling unseen to open her heart easily. One evening, while they were walking together for the first time in a long while, something slipped out of her. She said she used to believe she was invisible. The words came softly, almost accidentally. He stopped walking. He looked at her as if he had just been handed something priceless and fragile at the same time. In that moment, he saw the cost of his distance clearly. He wanted to apologize, but apologies felt too small. She quickly changed the subject. Uncomfortable with her own honesty, but once spoken, the truth lingered between them. From that day on, he began listening differently. Not just to her words, but to the spaces between them. He noticed how she hesitated before sharing opinions, how praise made her uncomfortable, how easily she blamed herself when things went wrong. He understood now that love would not begin with excitement. It would begin with safety. She, meanwhile, felt torn. Part of her wanted to believe he saw her now. Another part reminded her of the years she spent feeling unwanted in her own marriage. Her heart stood between caution and courage. One night, after another shared silence, she finally spoke. She told him she never expected love, only respect, only peace. Her voice didn't shake. That scared him, because it meant she had accepted the absence of something he was only just starting to desire. She went to sleep that night, believing she had said too much. He stayed awake, realizing he had said too little. The distance between them was no longer ignorance. It was history. Regret filled him not with despair, but determination. He knew now that beauty was never the real surprise. It was her strength, her endurance. The way she survived being overlooked. He didn't know if he could undo the past. But he knew one thing clearly. If he stayed silent now, he would lose her forever. And for the first time since their marriage began, the fear of losing her felt stronger than the comfort of duty. The days that followed were quiet in a different way. Not heavy, not empty, just careful. He no longer avoided conversations, but he also didn't rush them. He understood now that trust could not be repaired with words alone. It had to be lived day after day without pressure. He began showing up in ways that did not ask for anything in return. He listened when she spoke, even about small things that once seemed unimportant. He remembered details and followed through. When she needed space, he respected it. When she needed help, he offered it without making it feel like a favor. She noticed everything at first. She questioned it. She told herself this was temporary. People change sometimes, but not always for the right reasons. She stayed guarded, careful with her emotions, careful with her expectations. Yet slowly, something inside her softened. Not because she trusted easily, but because his consistency left little room for doubt. One evening, after a long day, she sat quietly while he prepared tea. The moment felt simple, almost ordinary, yet it carried more meaning than all the celebrations they had once shared. He handed her the cup without a word and sat beside her, not facing her, just sharing the space. She spoke without looking at him. She said that being overlooked had become a habit for her long before marriage. That she learned early not to ask for attention because attention often came with conditions. She said she had accepted a life where love might never arrive. He listened without interrupting, without defending himself. When she finished, he said something he had never said before. He said he was sorry for not seeing her sooner. Not in a dramatic way. Just honest. Just real. She felt the truth in his voice, and that frightened her more than indifference ever did. That night, she cried, not from pain, but release. From then on, she began to allow small pieces of herself to surface. She spoke more freely about her thoughts, her observations, her quiet dreams that never felt important enough to share before. He listened as if each word mattered, and to him it did. Outside, life continued. People noticed the change fully now. They saw the way he looked at her, the way he stood closer, the way she no longer faded into the background. Some were surprised. Others were silent. A few apologized for past assumptions without saying the words. Directly, but none of that mattered as much as what was happening. Between them, he stopped thinking of the marriage as something he had accepted and began thinking of it as something he chose. Each day, again and again, there came a moment when he finally spoke of love not as a promise, but as a feeling he was still learning. He told her he didn't know when it started, only that life felt incomplete without her presence at his side. She did not answer immediately. She needed time. Time to let go of the version of herself who believed she was unworthy. Time to forgive without forgetting. Time to trust that this was not another moment that would disappear when comfort returned. He gave her that time. Weeks passed, filled with steady moments, instead of dramatic ones. Shared walks, shared meals, shared silences that no longer felt painful. Slowly, she smiled more. Slowly, she leaned into him without realizing it. One evening, she told him something she had never said out loud. She said she had learned to love him quietly, without expectation, because loving openly felt too risky. She said she had made peace with never being chosen. Those words stayed with him long after. They reminded him that love was not something owed. It was something earned. He told her then that he wanted to choose her not because of duty. It's not because of responsibility, but because life made more sense with her in it. He said he wanted to see her fully and be seen by her in return. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. Not as an agreement, but as acceptance of possibility. From that day forward, the marriage changed completely. Not in title, but in truth. She no longer hid her presence. Her confidence grew gently, not loudly. She wore what made her feel comfortable, spoke her opinions without fear, and laughed more freely. Her beauty, once hidden beneath silence, now lived in every part of her being. He realized then that the shock was never about how she looked. It was about how deeply it misunderstood her. Love found them not in grand gestures, but in everyday kindness, in patience, in humility, in the willingness to admit wrong and do better. Years later, when people spoke of their story, they spoke of transformation, of a marriage that began without love but grew into something stronger than most. He often thought back to the man he was at the beginning, afraid, distant, convinced that duty was enough. And he felt grateful that life had forced him to slow down and truly see the woman who had stood beside him all along. She, too, reflected on her journey, on growing from someone who believed she was invisible into someone who knew her worth without needing permission. In the end, love did arrive, not loudly, not suddenly, but honestly. And when it did, it stayed. Even after love found its place between them, life did not suddenly become perfect. What changed was the way they faced it together. Challenges still came quietly, like they always did. But now they were no longer faced alone. There were days when old habits tried to return, days when he withdrew into work or she pulled back out of instinct. But the difference was awareness. They noticed the distance as it formed and gently closed it before it grew wide. Silence no longer meant neglect. It simply meant understanding. She continued to grow into herself, not in ways meant to impress others, but in ways that finally felt free. She spoke when something hurt her. She allowed herself to disagree. She learned that her voice did not need permission to exist. He supported this growth without fear. The more confident she became, the more he admired her. He realized that loving someone did not mean shrinking them to stay comfortable. It meant standing beside them as they became who they truly were. People around them noticed again. But this time, the comments felt different. Some asked what changed. Others said she seemed more alive. He simply listened and smiled. He knew the answer had nothing to do with beauty or time. It had everything to do with being seen. There came a quiet afternoon when they sat together, watching life move just beyond their window. No phones, no conversation, just presence. She rested her head lightly against his shoulder without thinking. He froze for a moment, then relaxed. The small gesture carried years of meaning. Later that evening, she told him something she had never shared. She said there was a time she believed her role in life was to endure quietly, to accept what was given and not expect more. She said that belief nearly erased her. He held her hand tightly, the weight of her words settling deep inside him. He told her that endurance was never all she was meant for. And this time she believed him. They began creating memories that felt ordinary to others, but priceless to them. Morning tea shared in silence. Walks taken without destination. Laughter over forgotten mistakes. These were the moments where love lived most honestly. There were still misunderstandings. Still moments when old wounds ached unexpectedly. But instead of turning away, they faced those moments together. She learned that speaking did not make her difficult. He learned that listening did not make him weak. One day, while sorting through old belongings, they came across items from their early marriage. Photos taken when smiles were tense. Notes written out of duty, not affection. She studied them quietly and looked up at him. She said she was glad they didn't stay those people, so was he. As time passed, their bond deepened not through excitement, but trust. Friends and relatives spoke of them as an example, unaware of how far they had come to reach that place. Only they knew the distance they had crossed. She no longer felt the need to disappear in rooms filled with people. She spoke when she wished, stayed silent when she chose. Her presence carried calm confidence. Her beauty was no longer hidden, but it was also no longer something she questioned. He often thought about how close he had come to losing something irreplaceable. He understood that love was not fate alone. It was effort. It was humility. It was choosing to see the person in front of you before life forced clarity. One evening, as the day faded slowly, she asked him a simple question. She asked if he ever regretted marrying her. He answered without hesitation. He said he regretted not loving her sooner. Her eyes filled, but her smile arrived at the same time. They sat together as darkness settled, two people bound not by promise alone, but by understanding, strengthened over time. Their story was never about a hidden face revealed or a sudden transformation. It was about learning to look again, to listen deeper, to value what was always there. In the end, duty became choice. Choice became habit, and habit became love, not perfect, but real, and that made all the difference. Time passed gently, not rushing them, not testing them in loud ways. It moved quietly, adding layers to what they had already built. Their love no longer felt fragile. It felt steady, like something rooted deep enough to survive storms. They learned new versions of each other. He learned how silence helped her think, not retreat. She learned how his quiet moments were not distance, but reflection. Instead of misunderstanding these differences, they respected them. What once created gaps now created balance. She began to reconnect with parts of herself she had long ignored. Small interests, simple joys. She took time for herself without guilt. She learned that caring for her own happiness did not threaten the marriage. It strengthened it. He admired this quietly. He admired the way she grew without needing approval. He admired the calm confidence she carried into every space. He realized that when she felt whole, their love felt lighter. There came a period when work demanded more from him. Long hours returned, stress followed him home. In the past, this would have created distance. This time, they approached it differently. She supported him without losing herself. He leaned on her without expecting her to disappear into his needs. They spoke openly about exhaustion, about fear, about limits. They learned that honesty could exist without argument. One night, after a particularly difficult day, he came home defeated. He did not pretend everything was fine. He told her he felt unsure of himself, something he rarely admitted. She listened, held his hand, and reminded him that he was not alone in carrying that weight. That moment changed him deeply. He understood then that love was not just about admiration. It was about vulnerability. And he trusted her with his. She, in return, trusted him with her fears. She spoke about the lingering doubt that sometimes surfaced, the voice that still whispered she could be overlooked again. Saying it aloud weakened its power. He reassured her not with promises, but with presence. They marked no grand milestones, no dramatic celebrations. Instead, they measured their growth through quiet signs, the ease of laughter, the comfort of shared silence, the way difficult conversations ended with understanding instead of pain. People who met them now saw something rare. Not perfection, but peace. A connection that did not seek attention, yet was impossible to miss. One afternoon, while walking together, she paused and said she was proud of herself. The statement surprised her. She had never spoken such words before. He smiled, knowing how much they meant. Later, she told him she was proud of him too. For changing, for listening, for choosing love even when it demanded humility. The life they shared continued to evolve. Unexpected challenges still arrived. Loss touched their circle. Disappointments came and went. But through it all, they faced life as partners. He often reflected on how differently things could have ended. How easily duty could have remained duty. How silence could have stolen what love eventually protected, she reflected too. On how close she came to believing she did not deserve to be cherished. How dangerous quiet acceptance once felt. Their story was never about one person saving another. It was about two people learning to meet each other where they stood, as years settled gently around them. Love became something simple. Wake up together. Choose kindness. Go to sleep knowing you are seen. And in that simplicity, they found everything they once thought was missing.